Hello, welcome to KaiCreative. My name is Kai. In today's video, we take the Canon R6 out on a couple of shoot days alongside the Apple iPhone 14 Pro and compare the RAW and ProRAW photos. We throw them into Photoshop's RAW editor and see how far we can push them. So if you've been following the channel for the last couple of months, you will know that we've done a series of videos comparing the iPhone 14 Pro against a number of different Canon cameras. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure that you do. And for those review videos, I've mostly taken the JPEGs and HEIC photos directly from the cameras and iPhone for the photo comparisons, but a lot of you have left comments wanting to see the capabilities of the ProRAW files of the iPhone 14 Pro versus the RAW files of the Canon cameras. I also recently ran a poll and this video came up as the second most requested, so make sure you keep an eye out for the polls if you want to get more of the content that you want to see. Which means, of course, you want to see how far we can push these files in the edit. So, let's get on with it. If you don't know already, RAW files are usually taken directly from the camera's sensor. They are unprocessed, uncompressed files, which means they retain a lot more information and allow you much more flexibility when it comes to editing your images. The latest RAW files from Canon are the CR3 format, at least they are on the Canon R6, and the Apple iPhone 14 Pro has ProRAW photos that are saved as DNG files. So last week I was invited to shoot some videos for the Raw Strength Barbell team at the True Athlete event at the Excel Centre in London, and I used that opportunity to shoot some sneaky comparison ProRAW pics on my iPhone 14 Pro as well as on the Canon R6 while taking some headshots of the team. The Apple iPhone 14 Pro main camera has a 48 megapixel sensor and the Canon R6 full frame camera has a 20.1 megapixel sensor, which means technically the R6 should shoot a lot better in low light conditions and at higher ISO values, but the iPhone 14 Pro should capture more detail, technically. At this junction, let's jump into the edit and we're going to compare the Canon R6 RAW files against the iPhone 14 Pro RAW files. Let's open up the RAW file of this picture here. We're going to open it in Adobe Photoshop. You can also open it in Lightroom if you use Lightroom. This is the Camera Raw 15.5 and we can zoom in. There's a lot of texture in the face, and don't forget the lighting is quite harsh in this environment, so there's overhead lighting which is going to cause shadows around the face. But overall, we have a decent skin tone-ish. There's a little bit of an orange tinge, and that could be because of the lighting of the event. So the first thing we want to do is just raise the exposure slightly. We want to raise the exposure, but we don't want to overexpose. We can pull back the highlights a little, and we want to lift the shadows slightly, maybe pull the whites back slightly as well, and also pull the blacks down ever so slightly, raise the exposure a little bit more to about 1. We're going to add a bit of texture and we'll add a bit of dehaze in there as well. So the real point that we want to try is with the vibrance. How far can we push the vibrance before the skin tones look a bit too orange? So we can probably go to about 30. We don't see too much of a shift there. The way that the image renders the background with the subjects, we can just see from the quality of the hair. The detail's been captured. Remember, this is a 20.1 megapixel camera, and this is quite dark. It's quite harsh lighting, and that is how our files perform in this kind of dark environment. So what we want to do now is open up the corresponding iPhone 14 Pro RAW file. This was taken on the 48 megapixel camera of the iPhone 14 Pro. So jumping straight in with the color of the image, it's slightly orange. Again, iPhone doesn't seem to perform too well in these overhead lights. We look at the way that the background and foreground's been rendered. It hasn't done a bad job at all of trying to capture some of the detail in the hair as well as the texture. But how does it perform when we start playing with these settings? So if we lift the exposure slightly, and I think the iPhone's already compensated here with exposure, but as we bring down the highlights, bring the whites down slightly, maybe crush the blacks a little bit for a bit of contrast, we'll add a bit of texture back in, a bit of clarity, and then add that dehazer. And we've got this kind of moody-ish look. How about punching the vibrance? How does that affect the overall image? If we go to about 5, 10, starts to get a very orangey look to it. You can see the difference. I think the R6 definitely renders the skin tones a lot better inside than the iPhone 14 Pro. But overall, the 48 megapixel sensor doesn't do too bad at capturing details. Let's save both of these images and let's open this up and display these side by side and tell me what you think. One of the things you probably noticed shooting inside with the artificial event lighting was the yellowish tinge that the iPhone had on the skin tones. The Canon R6 photos definitely represented the skin tones a little more accurately. And with that being said, it's only fair to take both of these outside on a sunny summer's day and see what we can get. So one of the problems with the True Athlete event was that it was inside and it didn't give the iPhone 14 sensor a fair chance, I think, against the full frame Canon R6. So what I've done today is I've come to Orderly House, which is like a manor stately home, to test out the Pro RAW of the iPhone 14 Pro versus the Canon R6 RAW files. And hopefully we get some nice outside photos and you be the judge. We're gonna pixel peep, we're gonna look at it, and you tell me whether Pro RAW is any sort of competition against RAW for the R6. So let's go. Whoa, 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 what's happening? What's happening? Okay, let's go, go, go. Go, 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 go. It's a very sunny day today, so we have this extreme difference of super dark shadows and super bright blown out parts of the photos, and it's going to be useful to see what information is actually retained in those blown out parts and those super dark shadows, to see how the dynamic range is in the Pro RAW and RAW files. So we jumped into Photoshop Camera Raw 15.5 again to check our outside RAW images, and first up is the Canon R6 or .cr3 file. And really what we want to check first of all is the shadows and the highlights, so that dynamic range. And the first thing to check is going to be the highlights. So the highlights, if we drag them down, we should be able to reveal more detail in the blown out or bright parts of our image. And if we do that, pull it all the way down, we can see that it does indeed reveal extra texture and layers in our clouds. So I'll just pull that up again. You can see it's quite blown there, and as we pull it back, it shows us the details in the clouds. Now we're going to try the same for our shadows. How much information is actually retained in the darker parts of our image? And we can do that by pulling up the shadows. And you can see, actually, yes, the sensor has captured extra detail in those shadows. Seems a little bit pixelated. Remember that the Canon R6 is a 20.1 megapixel camera, so it's probably not going to be as sharp as we zoom in, but we can definitely see from 0 all the way up to 100 on our shadows. We can see that we have captured extra information, although slightly pixelated. Now, of course, the other thing that you can do with your photos in RAW is make the colors pop. So we're going to do that now. First of all, we're going to lift our whites and we're going to drag down our blacks to add some contrast to our image. We're going to add a little bit of texture, a little bit of clarity, and some dehaze, again, to get some extra contrast going on. Another great thing to do is to punch the vibrance, probably not that much, maybe to about 40, to really make those greens and blues pop. And talking about color grading, we might want to go to the mixer and focus on those two prominent colors, the blues and the greens of our image. So if we go to the luminance of our color mixer, we can darken those blues and then brighten the greens, particularly in the foreground here, so they stand out. We can go to saturation now and slightly saturate our blues to make them even punchier, as well as the greens to make them super green, maybe not that green. And here is our edited image. This is what our edited Canon R6 RAW image looks like. And the question is, can the iPhone 14 Pro RAW files do as well in the edit as the Canon RAW files? Well, let's find out by using the exact same image taken on the iPhone 14 Pro. So I have my equivalent iPhone 14 Pro DNG file or Pro RAW file. And we're going to try exactly the same thing. We're going to look at the highlights, we're going to look at the shadows, and then we're going to try and make the colors pop. So first of all, let's look at those highlights. Let's go to our clouds, pull those highlights down. And I'm not seeing any real new textures or surfaces revealing themselves by lowering the highlights here. Maybe a slight variation here, but not as well as the Canon R6, which is kind of to be expected. But let's check our shadows now. So we have our darker parts of our image, and let's raise the shadows on there. Let's raise the shadows here. Oh wow, okay, so we definitely have much more information retained in the shadows of our images than we do in the highlights. And actually lifting the shadows on these areas, to me, it seems to reveal a lot more information. And I think that might be down to the larger sensor size, that 48 megapixel sensor. If we zoom in over here as well, do the same check. It's very dark, but the sensor has kept a lot of information for the leaves that are in this area here. So hats off to the iPhone 14 Pro for doing that. Now, of course, this is probably too much, so we'll darken it slightly. And now let's go to the color grade. So we'll raise the whites, we'll crush the blacks to try and give more of a contrasted look. We'll add a bit more texture, clarity, and add the dehazer to add extra contrast, punch the vibrance. And already it's looking very vibrant just from that. But let's go into the color mixer and again focusing on the blues. So again, punching the blues a little, lifting the greens a little, then going over to the saturation, and we don't want to have too much of a punch on the blues, but a little bit more there and a little bit of green there. And this is our color graded Apple iPhone 14 Pro ProRAW photo. Let's see how it compares side by side to the Canon R6. And guys, let me know what you think. Is there anything that you would do differently to check the dynamic range or make your colors pop? Let me know down in the comment section below. So definitely the R6 performs well in all areas, inside or outside, but actually outside in the blazing sun with plenty of natural light, the iPhone 14 Pro ProRAW files aren't that bad at all. Okay, so what did you guys think of our little experiment with the Canon RAW versus Apple's ProRAW photos? And what do you think about phone photography in general versus using cameras like the Canon R6? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Don't forget to drop us a like, and if you haven't done so already, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell for notifications. And now that you've watched this video, check out my iPhone 14 Pro vs Canon series over here, or this video that YouTube thinks that you will like. In the meantime, stay creative, imagine, implement, and inspire, and I will catch you next time on KaiCreative.